Hi, friends. This is David Packer, and this is a training video for people involved in cross-cultural or multicultural work. And it's really for our own organization called Kindness. We work with sexually exploited people, but my comments will be relevant for people who are working in any multicultural Christian work. Today, we're looking at what culture is, and this is just a brief introductory video. Now, culture is a system of values that have developed in a certain people over hundreds of years. And it has balance and symmetry. The values complement one another. It's how they work and how they carry on their existence. The intention of culture is to pass along the secrets of survival to the next generation. So it depends very much on what those people have experienced. It's different from customs. Customs are what you can see. Customs is the way they act. Culture is the way they think. You can compare these to an iceberg. An iceberg is 1/8 above water, 7/8 below water. The 1/8 above water, that's customs. But the 7/8 below water, that's culture. Now we can observe customs. We can see how people act, and sometimes we can even mimic their actions. But how they think, that's much more difficult to learn. And what you find is when people move to new culture, they go through three basic stages of adjustment. The first one is simply doing things like they did back home and assuming that people will understand. The second one is they begin to do things like the people do, but they really don't understand how the people think. And they do those things just because that they realize in order to get something done, this is the way you have to do it. But then, if they're there for a long period of time, a different mindset sets in, and that is the idea that they begin to relate to the local perspectives and the values, and they become a little bit like that culture themselves. And you see them start to slip rather than saying that's the way they do it. You say things like that's the way we do it. And you realize you've adopted some of their perspectives and thoughts and attitudes. It just happened to you slowly but surely. Well, that's adjustment, and that happens to everybody when you go to another culture. But when you first come, it's always challenging. Now, you want to act like them, and that's good. Uh, Augustine the Great, when he moved from Rome to Milan, he gave us an expression that stayed to this day. Fourth century, he moved from Rome, where they fast, the priests fast on Saturday, and goes to Milan, they fast a different day of the week. And then when he comes back to Rome, they learned the priest learned that he didn't fast on Saturdays like they did. He fasted on a different day of the week, like the Milanese did. Some were even offended, thinking that was wrong. But he said, "But when I'm in Milan, I do as the Milanese. But when I'm in Rome, I do as the Romans." That's the source of that expression. When in Rome, do as the Romans. So if we go someplace, do as they do. That's hard, but it's at least in some level, it's possible. What if I told you when you go to another place, think like they think? Well, that's very, very different. Now, what are those influential factors that shape a culture? Climate is huge. Climate shapes our expectation for the future and our sense of how we survive. For example, if you're in a warm, tropical climate, well, the next planting season is just around the corner. If you're in a colder climate in the north, you realize, you learn very quickly, your people learn very quickly that if you do not work hard in the summer and prepare, when the winter comes, you'll not survive. So people in the northern climes, they understand the importance of delayed gratification. They realize they have to work hard, they have to save, that they have to be careful with their resources. But if they plan, if they work hard, they can survive. So a very different perspective. But there are other things that influence culture. There are wars, there are movements, there are natural disasters, there are epidemics or pandemics. For example, the Black Plague in the 14th century, 15th century came through Europe, devastating to the people. It was just terrible. And some places, half the people died. Well, that developed a certain level of fatalism that you could not avoid your fate. And shortly after that, the teachings of Calvinism with predestination came about, and that fit into their worldview. that one had to accept one's fate, and God had things planned out. Uh, so, by the way, culture influences theology, and theology influences culture. But also, you have artists, you have movements, you have authors, you have all sorts of things that come along and influence culture. But culture is based upon the past. It is intended to help this culture survive, and it carries that momentum from the past into the future. Well, that's culture. Someone said culture is like an accent. We all have one, but we don't recognize ours. We recognize other people's, but not ours. Well, you have an accent, I have an accent, you have a culture, and I have a culture. It's other people's culture that seems strange to us. Our culture, we learn as children, and it feels normal. Now, by the way, there's two words it's good to know. There's enculturation and acculturation. Enculturation, it's en culturation. That's what happens when we grow up at some place. We are enculturated. That's like learning your mother tongue, your mother language. It's relatively painless. It doesn't have to be studied. It happens automatically. Um, but when you go to another culture, it's like learning a second language. You have to learn acculturation. It's AC culturation, acculturation. That is learning a culture, learning about a culture from a different perspective. Now, as a system, all the pieces work together. And systems theory is an important theory to have an understanding of if you're learning about culture. Systems theory is the idea that when things are part of a system, and according to systems theory, everything is one system or another. The pieces all work together. To change one part impacts the others. Of course, environmental studies is one of the greatest applications of system studies, but we can see also that companies have systems. If you move from one company to another, you realize they have a different system. Even going from one kitchen to another. Ladies, if you go from your kitchen to another woman's kitchen, you start helping in the kitchen, you realize that she has this organized differently than I do, but there is a system. She has some system she has in mind. And you wouldn't go there to start changing things because you realize this is her system and you want to respect her as the she's capable of organizing her kitchen as she wishes. If at a office place, if you sat down at another colleague's desk, you would see he organized his desk according to a different system. Not your system, but his system. And there's some thought to it. Well, that's what happens with culture also. We go to another culture, they have a different type of organization. Now, culture varies on many, many different levels. We can generally say there are some similarities between all rural places and all urban places, but even be that as it may, it still fits within the history of a certain people. Language is a component also of carrying that culture's thoughts and values, and you cannot really separate the culture from the language that expresses that culture or that's spoken in that culture. But you can still learn a lot about culture, even if you don't have time to learn the whole language. Okay, that's what culture is. The next video, we're going to talk in more detail about some of the attributes of cultures, different cultures. Thank you.